You're standing at the pump, watching the numbers climb, half paying attention to your phone, when suddenly, click. The handle jumps in your hand and the fuel stops. No beeping, no flashing light, just a mechanical little jolt that tells you the tank is full. It happens so often we barely notice it anymore. But have you ever actually stopped to wonder how a gas pump knows the exact moment your tank is full? There's no camera looking inside your gas tank, no computer counting gallons against the size of your car's tank. So how does that nozzle know when to stop? Let's dig into the surprisingly clever, almost century-old bit of engineering hiding in plain sight in your hand every time you fill up. The story of the automatic shutoff nozzle starts, believe it or not, with a man watching workers fill barrels by hand. Back in the late 1930s, an engineer named Richard Corson noticed that filling large fuel drums was a slow, messy, and sometimes dangerous business. Workers had to hover over each barrel, watching closely so it wouldn't overflow, because overflowing fuel wasn't just wasteful, it was a fire hazard and a mess to clean up. Corson wanted a way to let the barrel fill itself and shut off automatically once it was full, without anyone standing there staring at it the whole time. And, in a twist that sounds almost too fitting, his flash of inspiration reportedly came from watching a toilet tank refill. If a simple valve could sense water level and shut itself off in your bathroom, why couldn't something similar work for gasoline? He filed for a patent around 1939, and it was granted in 1942. And the basic design he came up with is, remarkably, still the design used in the nozzle you grabbed the last time you filled your car. So, what's actually happening inside that big black handle when it clicks off? This is where it gets fun. Because unlike almost everything else at a modern gas station, the automatic shutoff has no electronics, no sensors, no chips, and no batteries. It's entirely mechanical, a little marvel of old-fashioned physics doing a job we'd assume today requires a computer. Here's the short version. Inside the nozzle, there's a small tube that runs down to a tiny hole near the very tip of the spout, right where fuel exits into your tank. As gasoline rushes through the nozzle, it speeds up as it passes through a narrow section inside the housing. That narrowing creates something called the Venturi effect, which, in plain terms, means that as fluid speeds up through a constriction, the pressure around it drops. That pressure drop pulls a small amount of air through that little tube at the tip of the nozzle, creating a steady trickle of suction as long as fuel is flowing, and that tip is surrounded by open air inside your gas tank fill tube. If the Venturi effect sounds unfamiliar, you've actually felt it in action plenty of times without realizing it. It's the same basic principle behind a perfume atomizer, or the way an old-fashioned spray bottle pulls liquid up a tube when you squeeze the trigger and air rushes past the opening. Fast-moving air or fluid past a narrow opening creates a drop in pressure that pulls other fluid or air toward it. Engineers didn't invent this phenomenon. They just found a clever, practical use for it, tucked inside a piece of equipment most of us touch multiple times a month without a second thought. Now here's the clever part. That suction is connected to a small chamber with a flexible diaphragm inside the nozzle body. As long as air can flow freely through that tiny tube, the diaphragm stays put and the fuel keeps flowing. But the moment your tank fills up high enough that liquid gasoline covers that little sensing hole at the tip, the air supply gets cut off. No air, no suction, and the diaphragm collapses. That collapse trips a small mechanical latch, which releases a spring-loaded valve, and the whole assembly snaps shut with that satisfying click you are familiar with. It happens in a fraction of a second, and it happens purely because of a temporary pressure difference created by moving fuel and blocked air. Nothing more high-tech than that. I'll be honest with you, even after learning how it works, some part of me still doesn't fully understand how something built from a tube, a diaphragm, a spring, and a bit of air pressure can be so consistently reliable. I don't know how it works, not really, not in my gut, even though I just explained it. It just feels like it should need a sensor or a chip somewhere. But it doesn't, and that's kind of the beauty of it. This mechanical simplicity is actually a big part of why the design has survived, almost unchanged, for more than 80 years. There's nothing to short out, nothing to reprogram, nothing that needs a firmware update. A gas station in a rainstorm, a gas station during a power outage, A gas station in the middle of nowhere with spotty infrastructure. None of that matters because the shutoff doesn't rely on electricity at all. It relies on the same fuel flow that's filling your tank to power its own detection system. Engineers sometimes call this kind of design self-actuating, meaning the process being controlled is also the thing doing the controlling. It's an elegant solution precisely because it doesn't add complexity to solve a problem. It uses the existing physics of the situation to solve it. Corson wasn't the only one tinkering in this space either. Once his original patent proved the concept worked, other manufacturers jumped in with their own refinements over the following decades. Companies like OPW and Husky Corporation, names you've probably never heard but whose hardware you've held dozens of times, developed their own versions of the diaphragm and venturi assembly, each trying to solve small annoyances in the original design. One early problem was that at very low flow rates, like when an attendant filled a tank slowly and carefully, the pressure drop across the venturi wasn't always strong enough to reliably trigger the shutoff, meaning a distracted worker could genuinely overfill a tank even with the safety feature installed. Later patents introduced secondary valves and cleverer chamber geometries specifically to make sure the shutoff worked reliably no matter how fast or slow the fuel was flowing. It's a good reminder that even a design that looks simple and elegant from the outside usually hides decades of quiet trial and error underneath. Of course, the shutoff nozzle didn't stay frozen in 1942. Over the decades, refinements were added. Modern nozzles often include vapor recovery systems, those slightly bulkier rubber boots you see around some nozzles, especially in states like California, designed to capture gasoline vapors and pull them back into the pump, rather than letting them escape into the air. This isn't really about stopping overflow. It's about reducing air pollution and the health risks tied to breathing in gasoline fumes. But it uses a similar principle of channeling vapor and pressure through small passages to do its job. Nozzles have also been refined over the years to reduce false shutoffs, those annoying clicks that happen when you're barely a quarter tank in because the nozzle was angled wrong or pushed in too far, kinking that little air tube. If you've ever had a pump click off way too early, that's usually not a malfunction. It's the same sensing mechanism reacting to a blocked tube for the wrong reason, usually because the nozzle isn't seated at the right angle in the fill pipe. Interestingly, some of the vapor recovery hardware that became common at gas stations starting in the 1970s and 1980s has actually started disappearing again in recent years. Not because the shutoff nozzle failed, but because cars themselves got better at the job. Most vehicles built after the late 1990s include something called an onboard refueling vapor recovery system, or ORVR, which captures fuel vapors inside the car's own fuel system rather than relying on the pump to catch them. Because of that, several states have relaxed or phased out requirements for those bulky rubber vapor boots on nozzles, even though the core mechanical shutoff underneath, Corson's original idea, is still doing exactly what it always did. It's a nice example of how one small piece of an invention can become obsolete, while the foundational piece keeps chugging along untouched. It's also worth pausing on why this invention mattered so much beyond convenience. Before automatic shutoff nozzles became standard, filling a tank required constant attention, and a moment of distraction could mean gasoline spilling onto the ground, onto shoes, or worse, near an ignition source. Gasoline is remarkably flammable, and its vapors are actually more dangerous than the liquid itself in terms of catching fire. A distracted attendant, a customer glancing away, even a few extra seconds of inattention could turn into a costly, hazardous spill. The automatic shutoff effectively removed human timing and attention from the equation entirely. It doesn't matter if you're staring at your phone, chatting with a friend, or lost in thought about your day, the nozzle is going to do its job regardless. And honestly, that's the part that impresses me most. Whatever mixed feelings I have about not fully grasping the mechanics, I have zero doubts about the value of it. It is a great safety feature, maybe one of the most quietly important safety features most of us interact with on a weekly basis, and almost nobody thinks about it. There's an interesting ripple effect from this invention too. Some historians and industry commentators have pointed out that the automatic shutoff nozzle is part of why self-service gas stations became widespread in the first place. Before this technology matured, having customers pump their own fuel felt riskier since an inattentive driver might let a tank overflow. Once the shutoff nozzle became standard equipment, the argument that self-service was too dangerous started to lose its footing, and stations across the country gradually shifted away from full-service-only models. A few states, like New Jersey and, until recently, Oregon, held on to full-service laws for other reasons, often tied to labor protections and consumer advocacy rather than pure safety concerns. But the underlying safety argument against self-service had largely been resolved decades earlier, thanks to Corson's little mechanical trick. It's a strange kind of legacy for an invention, isn't it? Most of us will never know the name Richard Corson, and most of us have never once thought about toilets while filling up our cars. Yet this quiet little mechanism, unchanged in its core design for over 80 years, is working exactly the same way in nearly every nozzle at nearly every gas station on the planet. No software update has replaced it. No sleek digital sensor has rendered it obsolete. It remains one of those rare pieces of technology that got the job right the first time and simply never needed to change. So, the next time you're standing at the pump, looking at the scenery around you, and you feel that little jolt and hear that click, you'll know there's no computer behind it, no camera, no artificial intelligence quietly calculating your tank's capacity. Just air, fuel, a diaphragm, and a spring, doing exactly what they were designed to do back before most of our grandparents were even born. And there you have it, a look into the small mechanical marvel that keeps your gas tank from overflowing every single time you fill up. It's a story of a curious engineer, a household toilet, and a piece of physics so reliable that it's barely changed in more than 80 years. Thank you for watching this episode. If you have suggestions for our next videos, please share them in the comments below. Thank you for joining us on this journey through the lost history of everyday things. Don't forget to like, subscribe, and stay tuned for more stories that surprise us with their origins, designs, and functionality passed down through generations.